Every journey has its issues. I think we all know that, don't we? Junior high, senior high, it's time for you to go as well. So every journey has its issues. Have you ever been on a journey? We won't even say long, on a journey where you have one or two children in the car and it just seems like the journey gets longer and longer. You ever hear this? How much farther is it? Are we there yet? I gotta go to the bathroom. Then you turn around and say, don't cross that line. That's your side, you're that side. He's on my side. Has anyone else ever heard those? And that's just on the way to the grocery store. So you kind of get that. That's the way our kids were. So you kind of get the idea. Usually on a journey of any length, though, there's going to be some anxious moments. We know that. There's going to be some impatience that's going on, especially if you got kids in the back. Maybe boredom. Boredom may take place. There's going to be issues that you're going to have to deal with, whether it's issues of restroom or, anymore, we do not pass a rest area up. We have decided to inspect every rest area. One, to make sure our knees still bend, and two, we won't go into that reason. But you all kind of get the idea. There will always be difficulties and troubles on a journey. We are on a journey here in life. And there's always going to be issues, folks, that we have to deal with. The journey will continue on, though, no matter how difficult our issues, no matter how many problems or difficulties, no matter how smooth we've been sailing, there's going to be issues. Abram's journey, let's think just a brief recall of his journey. It starts out, he's left his home in Ur of the Chaldeans, and God had spoken to him. Remember, he had been a worshiper of the moon god, probably. And God said, let's go on a journey. And God sent him on a journey. He said, I'm going to take you to a promised land, Canaan. I want you to go to Canaan. So immediately, he was supposed to go. What happened? Well, they only went to Haran so far and stopped. So on his journey, he's already had some issues. Dad said, this is as far as I'm going. He didn't follow instructions. He wasn't supposed to take anyone with him. He took Lot with him. Then he missed the promised land, passed right on through it, went on through to, there was a famine. Failed his famine test is how I wrote it down. He survived an ordeal in Egypt. He learned from his mistakes and returned back to the promised land. He watched Lot make a disastrous decision. We're not done with that yet. Then he went to war to rescue Lot. So you can see that Abram's journey has been filled with issues, difficulties, problems, troubles, blessings. So what's the answer whenever we're on a journey like that? I want to take you back to the fact that I believe all of us are on a journey of faith and of life. Every one of us started at birth. Now, as I said before, sometimes we don't realize how good we have it whenever we're 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. Can you imagine not having serious problems? And when you're 7 years old, what was the most serious problem you had? Your sister or your brother. That was about it. There wasn't a lot of real issues. My sister was always a problem for me. She'd cause me more problem just to get me in trouble. I think that's the way girls were whenever you're 7 years old, personally. So you kind of get the idea. Now you get into life and what takes place? Well, there's always issues. So in those issues, on your journey of life, how are we going to deal with it? Well, the very first thing that we're going to see in chapter 15 today, in Lot's journey. Now, here's a little secret that I have to knowing Scripture. I'd like to encourage you to do this. Learn what the chapter says. So chapter 15, if you were someone was to ask you about Genesis, where's this stuff about Abraham and Lot and all that? You're going to say it's around chapter 15. And here's how you're going to remember that. Chapter 15 is all about a conversation between God and Abram. It's a conversation. So let's talk about talking to God. The very first thing that we're going to see in our passage today in chapter 15, I think Abram's saying, Lord, let's talk. We got some things to talk about here. In chapter 15, we're going to see that it's a voice of uncertainty by Abram. All of us have heard the voice of uncertainty at some time or another. We've all heard the voice of uncertainty at some time or another. Maybe when you were helping your child learn how to ride a bike. Now, I figured out why we teach our children to ride a bike when we're young. Because you get old, your knees will not run far enough to keep them up. All right? But what do? You've got a hold of that bike and you're running alongside them. They're pedaling, you're running. And what are you saying? It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Dad's going to let go. Anyone else remember that? And then lo and behold, what do? They crash immediately. And you pick them up and you set them up and you send them on their way again. Well, there's that voice, Dad, I can't do this. That voice of uncertainty. Or whether it's about shooting a basket. I taught my kids to shoot baskets. And there's always that voice of uncertainty. Or hit a ball, drive a car. Now, the uncertainty about driving a car wasn't necessarily on children's part. But can you remember the first time you let them back out of your driveway? And you guys, you know what they're saying? Your wife is saying to you, are you nuts? You can't let her go by herself. You follow her. That's what Deb told me. She wanted me to follow Michelle everywhere she went. Make sure she's doing okay. The voice of uncertainty. Are we sure we want to do that? I'm not for sure. Anytime we're trying to teach something new, there's a voice of uncertainty. Maybe it was your voice saying, I can't do that. I can't do that. I've heard many a widower or widow say, I can't make it. I can't do that. A voice of uncertainty. And they find out that they will. They may not like it, but they will. I can't take anymore. How many times have we sat down with a family that says, I just can't take anymore. I'm in over my head. I'm filled up to here. Many times we hear that. Abram has hit the proverbial wall. He's hit the wall. Uncertainty has crept in. And you're going to hear it in his voice. Remember, Abram started the journey slowly, but he didn't question God. He left. Left Ur of the Chaldeans and on his way. But now he's realized that this journey is not a cakewalk. Remember whenever you was getting ready to leave home, maybe right out of high school, and you're going to set out on your own? Remember how easy it had been at home? Now, we didn't realize it was easy, but it had been pretty easy. Dad was putting food on the table. I had to pay for my own car, my own insurance, my own gas money, but I didn't have to pay for rent, or I didn't have to put food on the table. They took care of all those things. I forgot how easy that was. You know, you kind of set out on your own. And that's what Abram has come to the conclusion. He's hit that proverbial wall. And whenever he did, what's he going to say? Lord, let's talk. Lord, let's talk. We need to sit down. The very first problem, verses 2 and 3, the voice of Abram. But Abram said, Sovereign Lord. Now, Sovereign Lord, that's very important. Let me clarify that. He's saying Lord and Master. He didn't say Lord. Lord and Master. That's who he's identified his God as being. What can you give me since I remain childless? And the one who will inherit my estate is Eleazar the Damascus. And Abram said, you have given me no children, so a servant in my household is to be my heir. The voice of disappointment is the very first thing we're going to see that Abram has, is the voice of disappointment. God, O sovereign Lord, my master, what can you give me? I've become wealthy. Now, God has done that, but I'm wealthy. I have more animals than anyone in the area. I have servants. I have gold. I have silver. What can you give me? Now, God has already been the one who's given all those blessings, but Abram, sometimes we forget where this all comes from. He said, I wanted an heir, and you promised. You promised. Now, let's stop there for a moment, and I want to ask you, have you ever been disappointed with God? Of course you have. We all have it sometime or another, that God has not responded the way we think He should have. We all see our daily blessings. We all know that we've been blessed over and again, but sometimes we take that for granted, or we get to thinking, I've earned this. But that's not the case. Those daily blessings are God pouring them out upon us. Just like Abram should have realized those were his blessings that God had poured out upon him, even in bad times, even though he had disobeyed, even though he had messed up the famine, even though he had gone into Egypt, even though he went through the promised land. God poured out blessings upon him. Your life's not been perfect. I know most of you. My life has not been perfect, and all of you know me. My life's not been perfect. But I can tell you, even in imperfection, God has blessed me over and over and over again. Oh, thank you. But sometimes I get thinking, I've done this. We all get there. Abram is there. So what does he do? He turns to God and said, God, I'm disappointed. You've not given me the heir. I'm going to have to leave everything I've got to a servant. You've not given me an heir. You hear the disappointment in Abram's voice. See, there's going to be difficult times for all of us. There's going to be times that we're going to have questions. There's going to be times that you're questioning what God is doing or not doing. Folks, that's why we call it faith. We have to trust God. Abram's learning he has to trust God. Not always going to understand what he's doing, not always going to be able to see it, but he's got to trust God. So those questions that you've had about God, here's what I think you need to realize. That's not unnatural. Abram, or Abraham, is the father of faith. And he has questions. It's not unnatural that you're going to go through that. It's a growing process. You listen to his questions now. He's been on his journey for a few years now. You're listening to his questions. Let's see where he's at in 10 years. Or where he's at in 15 years. If you've got as many questions as you did 15 years ago, we need to get you in Bible study. Plain and simple. Because you ought to be growing. It's called faith, a growing faith. But it doesn't mean your questions are going to go away. Lord, why did that happen to our family? Lord, why did that take place? Lord, I don't know why I've got this problem that I've got. We're all going to go through that. It's how we deal with it that's going to be the key. So the very first thing you're going to see is that Abram's got these questions. Questions of what's going to take place. How's this going to work? So we find ourselves in a predicament here. He's disappointed with God. The second one is verse 8, where he's going to have more questions. Verse 8 said, but Abram said, Sovereign Lord, how can I know that I will gain possession? God has just got through saying, Abram, I've given you all of this. But how will I know, Lord? Now each of you should take an assessment right now of all that God has done for you. You each should take an assessment of all that you have. That roof over your head, that meal that you're going to have, whatever it might be. Give God some credit here, all right? He's blessed you. Give him some credit. I want you to think now, those are just the basics. How many's got a TV? Oh, interesting. It might have been easier to ask who doesn't. How many has more than one? That just happened, didn't it? We're not going to call that a blessing because there's too much evil on it. Do you realize the people in the world that don't have one? Don't have that entertainment in their home? Do you ever think maybe God's helped you afford that? Because you've been blessed? How many of you believe you live in the best nation in the world? Most of us. Did that just happen? Or has God given you a special blessing? Now, I'm sure people in Germany and England and Ireland, and probably not in Paris today, but most people would say they live in the best place in the world. Now, what makes us feel that way? God. He's given us a heart for this place. Our God is wonderful. But Abram's got these questions of, how will I know that's all going to be mine? And God says, how do you not? I've already given it to you. How do you know you are not being blessed? Look at your life. You've already been given blessings beyond degree. That's what he told Abram, and that's what he would tell us today. So the very first thing that we're going to see is that there's this voice of uncertainty. A voice of uncertainty. Every one of us have it. Every one of us are uncertain about what God's doing in our life. If I was to ask you what God is doing in your life, you'd say, I'm not for sure, Brother Mike. I'm not for sure what he's got me doing. Some of you might say, well, he's guiding me, but I don't know where I'm going. Abram don't know where he's going, folks. He doesn't know how he's going to end up. He has to trust God. I can't tell you where God's taking you today. You've got to trust Him. I don't know where He's taking Latonia Christian. I hope it's to great things, greater than we're doing. But He's in charge. Abram had to learn that. So there's always going to be some uncertainty in your life. Uncertain about what's going to take place on your spiritual walk. Does anyone think they're not going to stumble spiritually? We all will. However it might be, we're going to stumble. The next thing we're going to see is the voice of authority. Chapter 15 is going to continue to be God. Now this time it's God speaking. See, we're not unfamiliar with voices of authority. As a youngster, who's the voice of our authority? Our parents. When Dad speaks, you're supposed to do. Then there's our school teachers. A school teacher is a voice of authority. Now, most of you can remember those days whenever they were the voice of authority. And if not, who was the next voice of authority? The principal. How many of you, this is good. Turn the cameras on the crowd. How many's been in the principal's office? Voice of authority. All right, thank you. Shame on you all. I can't believe that. The next voice is the policeman. I'm not going to ask you how many have been in there. So, the policeman. Now, how do we know he's authority? You let him pull up behind you and turn his lights on. He doesn't even have to ask. What do? You pull over, and you're praying that he wants the guy in front of you. I know what you're doing. Yeah, you're thinking, it couldn't have been me. It must be that guy up there. Yeah. He's a voice of authority. So who's the next voice of authority? The judge. And what's the judge going to do? Saying, the policeman told me that the principal said you were a bad boy. Kind of get the idea. We're used to voices of authority. Then we've got, as we get older, we don't have to worry so much about those type of issues. What's the next authority? The doctor. There's not very many of us who haven't heard a doctor say, you need to lose weight, son. The last doctor that told me that was real skinny, about the size of Don Barnett, and I looked at him and said, have you ever been this size? Well, I have not. I said, you don't know how good you could feel. So, the voice of authority. That's who they are. Well, the voice of authority today is God. We should recognize that the Bible is the authority that God has given us to live by. God's voice sounds like a voice of reassurance. Verse 1 will say this. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. God says to Abram, don't be afraid. Last night, lo and behold, perfect sermon illustration. Sound asleep, 2 preachers over by my closet door fell. Boom. You know what I did? I said, Deb, get up and find out what's going on. So, if you need me, holler. She come back and said, everything's fine. It's the voice of reassurance. That's what God does for us as well. Reassurance. Abram had faced death while rescuing Lot in chapter 14. And he knew that he had no heir. And he said, God, I'm so disappointed that you haven't given me an heir. And God comes back on a voice of authority and said, be reassured, I've made you a promise. He said, I'm going to be with you. Don't be afraid. God reassured him. And God reassures you if you will allow Him. In those issues that you're going through in your life, let God reassure you. If you're going to try to deal with those issues by yourself, you're in trouble. Let God reassure you. Let Him open His Word and let Him speak to you. I've encouraged you to read the Proverbs. You can't read the Proverbs and not see that God's speaking to you. There's rules in there I don't like. I think, is that really a rule? Yeah, there's some direction in there that each of us need. Verses 4 and 5 will say this. Then the word of the Lord came to him. This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir. He took him outside and said, look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. This is an interesting passage in the Hebrew. I want you to get this. Whenever the first part, when it said, it's a voice of firmness if you're doing your outline. God has taken Abram. Abram said, I guess I'm going to have to let the servant be my heir. It's a reaffirming, resounding, it's emphatic. No! That's the way God did it to Abram that day. No! Your heir will come from your own DNA. It's going to come from you. Then, when it says that he took him outside, I want you to think about forceful. He picked him up and took him outside and said, count the stars. There wasn't anything gentle about this with God. It was very firm in the Hebrew. Count the stars if you can. That's how your heirs are going to be. Wow. God wanted his attention, and I think God got it. I want you to think forceful. It was a voice of leadership. It was a voice of power. It was a voice of firmness. Verse 8. He also said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur to give you this land to take possession of it. He said, how shall I know this shall be mine? He said, I am God. No one else. I am God. I gave this to you, and it shall come to pass. Today I want to remind you, he is Lord. He is the one who has brought you out of the bondage of sin. He is the one who has offered eternal life to you. He is the one who has put it all at your feet. He said, I am the Lord, and I have brought you on this journey of faith. Why question him? That's what he's asking. Why would we question him today? The next one we're going to see is the voice of impatience. The voice of impatience. Chapter 16. Tired of waiting? Well, we're going to talk about that in just a second, but we got a skit that's going to take place first. And as soon as the skit is done, I will finish this out. But the skit will give you a great message of where we're at.
Is he here yet?
No, not yet, but he's due here any minute.
Boy, that's all I need to be late with a boss like him. At least I beat him here.
Yeah, I think his head would explode or something. He has the patience of an IRS agent at a televangelist audit.
Good morning, Mr. Finkelmeyer.
I better have that Meyer report on my desk before my seat hits that chair. And while we're at it, get me a cup of hot Joe, and I want to push them up with grape jelly on it.
I'll get right on that.
Where is it?
Man.
How do you suppose he does that?
Does what?
He talks so quickly without ever taking a breath or anything. You suppose he's an alien?
It wouldn't surprise me.
I heard that, and believe me, it's going to be right on your next evaluation. And by the way, where's that Meyer report at? I don't smell that muffin yet.
It's coming, sir. Oh, man. That guy's impossible to please.
No kidding. You know, I had the Wilson report for him the other day, and he bit my head off because I missed a semicolon on page 4.
Come on. Is this muffin ever going to get done? If it's not, I'm going to be unemployed. I'll bet he could find something wrong with his own mother.
There you read that my report that's not on my desk. No, you can spell that muffin cookie. And by the way, if my mom calls, let me know, okay?
Are you expecting her?
That's none of your business. But I haven't gotten a birthday card from her yet. And if it ain't here by tomorrow, you let me know.
It's almost ready, sir. I think we need a microwave toaster oven. So it's your birthday?
Of course it's not my birthday, you idiot. You think I'd be doing my birthday? It's the middle of next month. If she hasn't sent me that, if she hasn't sent me that tomorrow, you let me know. And if you send her an email and you tell her that her son's gotten a year older and her mother doesn't even know.
You know, he's got issues.
Issues? That's like Hitler. It's like saying Hitler was a little mean.
Hey, Morgan, I didn't see you at Sunday school last week.
No, I had to miss. The kids were both sick. My son broke his foot. Was it good?
Oh yeah, we talked about God's mercy. You know, how patient He is with us even though we mess up sometimes.
Man, isn't that the truth? I don't know where I would be without that kind of grace.
Me either. It's pretty amazing when you think about it, the kind of patience it must take to be able to overlook some of the stuff that we put God through.
Yeah, really. I just wish we could get old Mr. Finkelheimer to come to church. He could use a few lessons.
And where's my muffin?
That's all right. That's right.
Never mind the muffin either. I'm on my way to lunch. And don't worry about the call from my mother. I've already taken care of it. And she had forgotten my birthday, even though she said she was going to put a card in the mail. If I get any calls, I'll be at the Japanese restaurant up the street, you know, with the standing tables. And you guys better go ahead and take your lunch and be back before I do, or you're both fired.
But sir, it's only 9:05.
Your point?
Nothing.
Oh, nothing.
Your coffee, sir?
Forget it. I'll be done with lunch before it cools, and I'll have it when I get back I'll have it when I get back. And along with that, the shock report, if you know what's good for you.
You were saying?
That man has issues and a caffeine problem.
So join me for a quick lunch.
Who eats lunch at 9 in the morning?
We do. We'll grab a bagel or something. When he's in this kind of mood, you just roll with it.
But what happens at noon when I'm hungry?
Well, we'll go to lunch then. At the rate he's traveling, the workday will be over by 10:30.
Oh, yeah. I just remembered why we put up with him.
Exactly, my friend. Join me.
After you, O wise one.
Bud retired from Covington. Justin just called him an idiot. I just think there's issues coming, but good job. Thank you all so very much. You kind of get the idea. Impatience. Sometimes we just can't wait. We think we're in such a big hurry, and we're tired of waiting. The Scripture is not clear how much time has passed between the conversation with God and at this point in chapter 16. Some believe that it's somewhere between 3 and 6 years. But now Abram and Sarai are tired of waiting. They've become very impatient with God. Verse 1 and 2 will say this. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Being impatient has a lot of issues. Impatience brings resentment. Anytime we get impatient, either with God or with those around us, we will soon have resentment. All of us will suffer from moments of impatience. There's not a one of us that won't suffer that. We'll feel that something should have already happened, just like Mr. Stinkelmeyer or whatever his name was. Impatience isn't limited to just other people. And we become impatient with God. We say, "Where's the blessings, God? You said if I followed you, everything would be cleared up." If you find that, I want to know, because I'd like to read it for myself. Everything's not cleared up. It just means that I'm approaching life differently. I read an article recently that said, God can't bless you until He gets you where He wants you. Pretty interesting point. That sometimes we're so far away from God's blessings, we've got to have Him move us. Being impatient, folks, has enough issues of its own without letting resentment develop within us. And what was the resentment? Sarai said, the Lord has kept me from having children. She blamed no one but God. God has kept me from having children. So because of impatience and resentment, Abram and Sarai made a bad decision. If you get caught up in impatience and resentment of God, you're on a collision for bad decisions. We all know that. There's probably not a one of us that hasn't experienced that at some time or another. You ever made a bad decision because you were being impatient? I was in a line of traffic this week. Over here on 3L, you know where they had the lane blocked? And lo and behold, I'm not a very patient person, I'll be quite honest about that. I'm just cruising along doing fine at 2 miles an hour with everybody else. Whoa, here comes this car around me. He got in front of us. He gained 4 cars, went through an illegal lane, through a work construction group, and then slowed down. And you're thinking, I'm not going to tell you what I was thinking. Never mind. You ever made a bad decision? I think that wasn't a good decision. Now, if you're in this church today, that wasn't a good decision when you passed me, because I'm going to use it as an illustration. So, I don't think you're in the church today. Being impatient leads to bad decisions. Verse 5 will say this. Then Sarai said to Abram, you are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. Well, impatience has led to a bad decision, and now it's going to be, we're going to shift the blame. I think Sarai come up with the idea, and now she's saying, Abram, it's all your fault. You ever made a bad decision and want to blame someone else? It took 2 of them to make that bad decision, and they did. Now Sarai is saying, you're responsible. God was first responsible, now you're responsible. Folks, we've got to realize this. These 2 chapters are about us learning. About us learning that we're going to have voices of doubt and insecurity, uncertainties. We're going to hear the voice of authority with God, but then it's going to be about us whether we grow impatient with Him. See, God was still God. They made bad decisions. Now, there's not anyone here today who's not made a bad decision. The next part is the best part. God still has a plan. God still has a plan. Chapter 16, verse 16 through 17:1. That's where one ends, where the other one starts. It says this. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty. Walk before me faithfully and be blameless. Got 13 years that have passed. We have no record of God speaking to them during that 13 years. Abram and Sarai have either come to the conclusion that Ishmael was going to be the answer, or we've really messed up. One way or the other, they've made one of those decisions. And then God was silent for those years, at least according to Scripture. But here's the good news. God wasn't finished. Let's go back to the fact that all of us have made mistakes. We've all messed up our lives in ways that we look back and we shake our heads and say, what was I thinking? Or we'll look back and think, how did I get on this path? Or, it's been so long since I felt blessed. Many, many people suffer that, folks. I've had people sit in my office and said, you know, I don't think God even knows I exist anymore. God's not finished with you. That's the best news I've got for you today. He's not finished with you. You may be suffering from uncertainties. You may be suffering from impatience. But I want to tell you about the voice of authority. The voice of authority that says, I'm not done with you. Now be faithful. Now serve me. Be blameless. Take your life and clean it up. I have things for you to do. From 86 to 99, we have no record of God's voice. But Abram had great things that he was going to accomplish. His greatness hasn't even got there, and he's already really messed up. His greatest days are ahead of him. I believe your greatest days are ahead of you. Whether you're 9 or 90, your greatest days are ahead of you. 9 or 90, your greatest days are ahead of you. Because God has a plan for you. If you're 90, you're closer to seeing imperfection than we are. If you're 9, you can build on a whole lot of certainty of what God can do. And for all of us in between, are you giving God an opportunity to work in your life? Are you willing to say, take these uncertainties away? We need to talk. That's what God wants you to do. He's wanting each one of you to get focused on your journey of faith. He wants each one of you to see the blessings that He's already given you and anticipate the blessings that are coming. We've got blessings that are coming that are untold. I did a funeral this week. Many of you will remember Steve Willman, who used to attend here. Steve and Debbie. I did Steve's mother's funeral. And whenever I saw his brother Pat, the first thing he said is, you know, Mom has got a whole new vision of things, because she was a very faithful, Bible-reading Christian woman. So she got a whole new visions of things that I can only think about. I want my new vision right here. I want to see God working right here. I want to be able to see it right now. Maybe that's impatient. But then I realize all I have to do is open my eyes and see that God's wanting to work. God's just waiting on me. God's wanting to work in your life. There's only one thing He's waiting on. That's you. Will you please stand as we have our invitation?